Hi everybody, it's Amalia, and I'm here today with all of my watercolor crayons. I'm going to be working on some backgrounds and using all of my wonderful watercolor crayons from Stampin' Up, Target, Recollections, and Crayola. And this is part of a card hop called What Inspires You? And I'm going to talk about what inspired me to get started with card making, oh, those many years ago. Well, I think it started with the way it started for a lot of people at a Stampin' Up! Party. And these are what inspired me. These are the watercolor wonders from Stampin' Up! And that was our first project at that party. And that's what inspired me to get started. And I bought some supplies, and the rest is history because I haven't stopped buying supplies. Same story. I'm sure you all understand. So, as you can see, you can use a water brush to take the pigment straight from the watercolor crayon and apply it straight to your image. You can also scribble on your mat, and I use that a lot to pick up color. I have some images stamped here on some Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I'm using multiple colors like a light green and then a darker green to do shading on the frog. And as you can see, I stamped multiple images on this cardstock. I do that really often when I'm coloring any images. I do it with my Copic markers, I do it with watercolor, and so I did it here as well with the watercolor crayons. And I do that because for testing. I do my coloring and then I'll color another image, maybe another color. I test my shading, I test colors on the image. I usually just end up with one image that I like more than another, and I use that in whatever I'm creating. But I'm using all of the colors at my disposal. These Watercolor Wonder crayons are an old set, but they have really held up. They are at least 10 years old, and they're still nice and creamy. Here I am just drying off the final image, and I'll have a finished project for you at the end of this video. I am using watercolor paper next for the next style project with these watercolor crayons, and I had this paper pad for ages, and I just finally used up the final 6 sheets. I cut them up in 4 by 5 1/4 and made a stack ready to work with some rubber stamps. Here I have the Stampin' Up! Medallion stamp, and I'm going to use the Recollections metallic set that I have here. So I'll talk about the process and the technique a little bit further on in the video, but I'd like to go back to what inspired me to start card making. As you may know if you've watched my videos before, I'm a cake decorator and I've been teaching cake decorating classes for almost 20 years. One of my cake decorating peers invited me to a Stampin' Up! Party at her house, and I had a wonderful time and was so inspired by the Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, and we used watercolor crayons on that project. I also met my friend Bridget at that party for the first time. We were the two troublemaking students at the event. We both had a great time, and we've been friends ever since. But Michelle was the Stampin' Up! Demo. We still talk today, and she really inspired me. And I thank Andrea for inviting me to that party. That was the first time that I was introduced to card making and to the creativity that this is. You see how I did that? That shaky hand thing? That's called mezza mezz in Italian. Anyway, if you didn't catch that, I'm using two more Stampin' Up! Sets, the Belle Toile and the Toolbox. Belle Toile is a very old-fashioned, sort of Victorian-looking floral thingy, and I really love this image. This worked out really well. I went back to the Watercolor Wonder crayons from Stampin' Up. I used a chocolate brown color on the outer edges, and then a whole bunch of colors all over the place. Pinks and reds and oranges and blues and greens, and I made a hot mess of color all over the place on this stamp set. And you'll see how it turns out. And I really liked how it turns out. Not at first, but you'll see. So you lay your color down on the stamp, spritz it with a little bit of water, take your watercolor cardstock, lay it down. Make sure all of the paper comes into contact with the stamp. And you really don't need to make a fuss about it. It comes out pretty nice once you got the right image. I'm not happy with that, I'll be honest, but when it dries, it looks a lot nicer. So since I wasn't crazy about how the first pull turned out, I decided to go monochromatic. So I took a red, I took I think a pink as well, and scribbled all over. I didn't even squirt any more water onto the stamp set. I just took another sheet of paper, pressed it down, made sure that it got all over, and I liked that a lot better. I think it came out a lot nicer. So I'm getting fussy, and I just take a little piece of paper towel to soak up some of the pooling water, but you really don't need to do that. Just set it aside and let it dry, and it's going to come out really great. This time I took more of a peachy color and a brown. I did brown around the outer edges and a peachy color in the middle. Went ahead and did another pull, and this one came out really nice as well. Here I am using Stampin' Up! Tool Shed with a Crayola Slick Stick watercolor crayon, and I'm being very precise. I'm making sure to get every tool covered with this green crayon, and it really wasn't necessary. Um, as sloppy as you want to be, you can be with these watercolor crayons. They are, excuse me, they are nice and creamy, and they work really well. This first pull was just that one single color. It came out pretty decently, I think, and it looks much better when it was dry. This stamp has lots of little dots in the background, so I decided to grab a yellow marker. And just you can see, I'm just like, swiping it across, not being precise. Give another spritz of water to melt that crayon a little bit, and lay my paper down. This came out nice, I think, with the extra added color. I think it works, and nothing, wow, but I think it works really well. But if you take a look up in the right hand corner, you see that looks nice, right? Anyway, these are the Belle Toile, all nice and dry. You see how nice they came out when they dried. This is another Stampin' Up! Set. This is a simple, just lines, vertical and horizontal lines, kind of like hash mark style. This is not the right stamp for this type of technique. I'm sure it looks great with regular ink, but it just didn't work for me, and you'll see in a couple of minutes. I'm using the Recollections Tropical Colors in the watercolor crayons. These are scented markers. I had no idea while I was using them, but when I looked at the box a little bit later on and then I sniffed all of them, they're actually scented. They're pretty nice. They kind of smell like soap, different types of soap. Yeah, I blotted this one off. You can see there's nothing to it. It's just kind of like a blob, and if I wanted to make a blob, I could make a blob without using this stamp. So I'd try one more time, and it's still really, there's nothing unique or about that. Thumbs down. Don't give me thumbs down. Everybody give a thumbs up. We're going to work with Stampin' Up! Swallowtail right now. And this is the perfect stamp for this technique. This works out really well, and you get a beautiful watercolor design. I am using more of these tropical scented markers that I had no idea were scented. And just scribbling color on. I'm trying to get, good coverage, but I'm not being very particular, just scribbling the color on, trying to make sure it's somewhat uniform, but it doesn't even need to be uniform. You could just be as slapdash and sloppy as you want to be, and it's going to come out great, trust me. So, adding all my colors, then I'll spritz the water, and then you're going to see some magic happen. This time I'm taking 2 pieces of the watercolor cardstock and laying one on each half of the butterfly. I love it. What do you think? Give me a thumbs up if you like this technique, and leave a comment below and let me know what you think. If this is the first time that you're visiting my channel, I'd love to hear from you. My favorite thing is reading comments. And don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so that you can get notified whenever I post a new video. Now I'm using the Target Up and Up brand of these watercolor markers, and I'm just going right over the previous Recollections colors, just trying to keep in the same tone of colors or the same color family, and spritz the water on and lay my paper down, and looks great. You may notice that I'm always put the paper down on an angle. It just creates more visual interest that way, and instead of laying it like straight across. Here I decide that the details look terrific, but I want a little bit more coverage of color, and I use my water brush to just reactivate the color, and the details still stay there. There's lots of detail in this stamp, and the details are still there. I'm just using the water brush to spread the color out a little bit more to look more watercolor and painterly. It still maintains the details though when I use the water brush and spread the color all around. Looks really great. I'm so happy with the way these came out. Now I'm just using the water brush to dilute some of the crayon that's on the stamp. I used 2 layers of the different crayons, and so it's got lots of crayon color on it. And I use the water brush to dilute the color, spray a little bit more water on, lay my paper down on an angle, and there you go. There's bubbles of water, and I'm just popping those bubbles. Cleaning the stamps is very easy. Just put a ton of water on it, use a microfiber towel, and it comes right off. I took all my stamps to the sink later to clean them a little bit better because there's lots of nooks and crannies that they get into. Here I am doing some more. I couldn't stop making butterflies. This was turning out so great, so artsy, so wonderful looking. I just keep at it. And I'm spraying and coloring and being less, the further I go on, the more I do, the less accurate and detailed I am. I'm just scribbling, trying to use color and darks and lights, and having a good old time. Here's one of my final pulls, and popping those bubbles. You don't even have to pop the bubbles, really. Let it dry on its own. The bubbles will go on their own, or they'll stay, and you'll get a unique character, texture to the butterfly. Don't bother. There I go again. So what I'm going to show you next is the final results. Here are all the backgrounds dry, and ready to be used on my next project. They look so much better dry. This one even looks better dry. The Belle Toile, the first one, I didn't like it at all. These blobs, I'm still not a fan. I'll use them some way or another, but the butterflies made up for the failure of the blobs. They came out great, and now I have a bunch of backgrounds to use for my next few projects. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you try this technique and let me know how it comes out. Don't forget to leave a comment below and subscribe. Thanks everybody so much for watching, and I hope I see you again soon. Bye!